So we've covered a lot of ground so far here today, and I think it's fitting as a school, as a K through 12 academy here at Chelsea Academy, that we close with those who are actually doing the work every day of leading vibrant Catholic schools. We have a great panel lined up for you to start us off with that. Just like we did this morning, I'm going to introduce all of our panelists at once, then have our first speaker come up. I'm going to start on the far end of the stage. On the far end of the stage, joining us is Jeremy Tate. He is the founder and CEO of the Classic Learning Test. It's a really important humanities-based alternative to the SAT and ACT tests. He is also the host of the popular Anchored podcast on education and culture. And in addition to his work with CLT, Jeremy is a frequent speaker and contributor to popular publications. Next to Jeremy is Jeffrey Presberg. He is the headmaster of St. John the Beloved Academy in McLean. That's a great school where I sent my daughter before coming out here to Chelsea Academy. He has over 2 decades of broad experience in education, ranging from teaching and coaching to a variety of administrative responsibilities. And additionally, he is the founder and president of the Samuel and Erasmus Institute, a small institute for liberal arts, education, and culture. Then next we have Patrick Miggins. He is a middle and upper school teacher at the Heights School in Potomac, Maryland. He's also a member of our board of directors here at Chelsea Academy. His teaching career began at the Heights and has since spanned nearly 20 years in Catholic education, including a stint at Western Academy in Houston, Texas, where he served as assistant headmaster. And last but certainly not least is our headmaster here at Chelsea Academy, the man who's responsible for so much of our growth and success over the past few years. John DeJak brings over 20 years of experience leading and teaching vibrant Catholic schools to Chelsea Academy. He was the founding headmaster of 2 private high schools in the Twin Cities area and was most recently president of Father Gabriel Richard High School in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Mr. DeJak is going to start us off, so John, it's all yours.
Thank you, everyone. I want to just start off offering some special thanks to Emile, Doak, the executive director of the Chelsea Foundation, for having the idea for the conference, making it possible, doing all of the hard work you see here. This has been fabulous, Emile, so thank you very much for that. To Dr. Harn and our honored guests and colleagues for stimulating this conversation to build up our families, communities, and nation. And to the Chelsea Parents Association, our facility staff, and our dear students for their unparalleled hospitality and good cheer. And then finally, to all of you who have participated in and supported this conference, you are held close in our prayers and have our tremendous thanks. So before I begin my formal remarks, one of the things I lament as a school administrator is the fact that the time we're so enamored, or I shouldn't say enamored, I should say filled with things of the practical intellect, solving problems, writing contracts, writing policies, all that sort of thing. And very little time is given to contemplation. Or that's a personal problem I have. I think Jeff has got it covered, but I do not, that is something I struggle with. And why we got into this business to begin with. And so conferences like this are re-energizing, and certainly for me personally, allow me, especially if I'm asked to speak, to dig back into why we got in this business in the first place. And so it's a great pleasure to be here. Now, there was a talk of guilds prior. I am a member of the Guild of Lawyers. I am a member of the Guild of School Administrators, and with each guild, I suppose there are certain professional development one does. Continuing legal education is what they say in the law. Recently, last week, I was a participant and presenter at another conference, more dedicated to those practical pursuits. It was called, the presentation I gave was School Discipline and the Law. Now, it was held in Louisville, Kentucky, and I took the occasion to pursue a little bit more professional development, particularly studying the niceties of Title 27 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Some of you are laughing. Perhaps you too like bourbon. But yes, I went to the Bourbon Trail. And I was thinking as I was filling up my fourth tasting, I believe, I was thinking of, I asked Emile, I said, what should I speak on for this conference? And he said, don't worry, leading a vibrant Catholic school, you'll figure something out. So I did, and the bourbon helped. And so that is the background to this presentation. I apologize for not getting enough for all of you, as it'll probably be more clear if you had some. But anyway, the approach I took with this talk is kind of more of a meditation, I think. And it's a bit of a reflection of why we do what we do. We can get so caught up in the day-to-day of grading, making sure calendars are correct, making sure different people are taken care of in terms of the kids, our families, our faculty. But I wanted to just kind of step back, and this is just as much for me as it is for all of you, to kind of discover what it is about Catholic education, and particularly the role of a Catholic teacher. And I wanted to just kind of meditate on an aspect of that. And I'm hoping that it coheres nicely with what Dr. Harn was speaking of, and what my colleagues, I'm sure, will speak of as well. The task of the intellectual, indeed the task of any person, is to see the connections between things and their ultimate end and situation in the cosmos. It seems that it is the special province of the teacher to lead his young charges to see these connections, to open their eyes, to lead them to observe, to wonder, and to think. He will be especially successful if he can excite them to see the hidden architecture of things. To this end, he knows, the teacher, that common and everyday things, even comic strips, can take on a mysterious and even mystical quality, pointing to supernatural realities. Recognition of this may be considered what the great Jesuit political philosopher Father James Shaw called the classical moment. Shaw defines the classical moment as the instant when a human being hears or sees something that simply changes his life, and perhaps in changing his life, changes the world. Such moments are highly personal to each individual and specific to his life. It is upon reflection on these moments that one may conclude that they are classical, that in a brief instant, they define the highest things, truth, goodness, and beauty, and our response to them. These classical moments can be encountered anywhere: climbing old rag, reading scripture, gazing at the stars, listening to Beethoven's Fifth as a fifth grader, getting lost in the last minutes of the 1988 Notre Dame Miami game, admiring a sculpture by Bernini, joking on a scaffold, playing rugby, or if you're Wendell Berry, doing dishes. Perhaps the most significant of these moments are when they are encountered in the most unlikely of places or in the humblest of circumstances. And while this is a highly personal moment and the action of God's grace inspires an individual to recognize the experience, I propose that it is the duty of the teacher to awaken students to the possibility and reality of these moments. So how does the teacher do this? First, the teacher must have his eyes open to the really real. The teacher, especially in a Catholic liberal arts school, should come with the conviction that these moments happen, that the backdrop to these moments is a metaphysical conviction of God's continual action in the universe, and even more, his interest and excitement in all that he created, down to the tiniest creature. Indeed, the conviction that one sees and lives in a physical world of time and space, but that penetrating this is an unseen world of the really real. In a word, mystery. The place where one is put in touch with the supernatural, sometimes dramatically, other times in small glimpses. Both encounters can change one's life and therefore change the world. Second, the teacher must be a witness. This is intimately connected with the first point. Pope Paul VI famously said, "Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers, and if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses." One is a witness if he has first seen or heard something and has embraced that which he has seen or heard to the point of its proclamation. The imitation of Christ, of the really real himself, is the obligation of all believers, but especially the teacher. How intimidating and humbling it is to be called teacher, just as our Lord was known during his life on earth. Such was his vocation during his public life. How obligatory, then, is the life of a teacher in a Catholic school to be immersed in the mystery and to conform to it, to love our students as Christ loves us. It is something we must continually strive for, as we all do this quite imperfectly. Finally and practically, the teacher must introduce the reality of mystery as it relates to his discipline. In this sense, it is easy to refer to the humanities as a locus where this can be brought forth with clarity and profundity. The poets have acknowledged mystery by virtue of their putting into words and rhyme the most profound of human experiences. Likewise, many understand the metaphysical dimension that lay behind these experiences. As Chesterton said in one of his poems, "For every tiny town or place, God made the stars especially." Authors can be chosen who have these metaphysical commitments, and not just professed Catholics, but, I would concur with Flannery O'Connor, truly small c Catholic authors. Who is not moved by the scene of Hector, Andromache, and Astyanax in Book 6 of the Iliad? How human is the scene of the parting of a father going off to war from his family? How emotional. What love in wanting his son to be greater than himself. In another age, how mysterious the working of divine providence, recounted in a modern classic, Brideshead Revisited. Yves Lenoir must have had his own classical moment that moved his heart in order to express the profundity of the same supernatural twitch upon the thread by our Lord in order to lead the characters in the story back to himself. History, too, is replete with individuals who, in the quiet of their consciences, make decisions that ultimately affect the entire course of the world, for good or ill. The fine arts are also a conduit for the mystery. The simplicity of children's books excite the imagination, while the drama of the great masters elicit the emotions and, for the more experienced, touch the very fibers of their being. Maybe as a tiny person looking at Beatrix Potter or Matt Meehan books, fascinated with the tiny places and perspectives that only a kindergartner and Mrs. Tiggywinkle can understand. Or perhaps the older gentleman, upon hearing the lone trumpet in Mozart's Requiem, announcing the tuba mirum spargem sonum of the Dies Irae, is reminded that he too will one day be called before the judge. Math and science are occasions for the teacher to introduce mystery. The order, design, logic, and objectivity of mathematics points to a divine engineer. So too, the complexity of creation and the perfection of design in nature is an inexhaustible source of fascination and wonder. All of these things are charged with the grandeur of God. The teacher has the privilege and the duty to introduce students to this grandeur, as opposed to the soul-numbing sterility of modern philosophies of education, whose only aim is to get to the next level. Something whose analog is the video game industry, resulting, unfortunately, in the sad ubiquity of the 30-year-old man living in his mother's basement, the bottom level. I would like to close my brief remarks by quoting again from Father Shaw, who considers a scene from a Peanuts comic strip, and how even the occasion of a comic strip can be a classical moment in intersection with mystery. Quoting Father Shaw, "I often find philosophic principles in unexpected places. Linus and Charlie Brown are standing on a knoll. The darkest of nights surrounds them. While gazing into the mysterious night sky, Charlie says to Linus, 'Have you ever considered the enormity of the universe, Linus?' The question is definitely a new one for Linus, who clearly has not thought of it. In the next scene, with his arms wide as if taking it all in, Charlie continues, "Nobody knows what lies out there beyond the stars." This very observation suggests that we do wonder what is beyond the stars. The third scene has no words. In awe, both Charlie and Linus continue to stand and stare at the dark night. Finally, Linus, reflecting on the enormity of the question, says to Charlie, "I don't even know what's in the next block." End quote. Shaw reflects that this discussion is of the type that people are supposed to have, that our students are supposed to have. Indeed, our homes and schools may be the place where students are given the encouragement and the tools to have such conversations. At the very least, it is the duty of the teacher to make this introduction to the hidden architecture of the universe, to our students, especially because they are children, because they are open and innocent. And perhaps this should be instructive to us all as well, both teachers and parents. There is something to be said about becoming children like Charlie and Linus, for the kingdom belongs to such as these. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Emile and Chelsea, for having us here. This is a great assembly of minds and hearts. It's been mentioned about the Heights. I teach at the Heights, and Tim Carney is a friend of mine. He's a Heights dad. About a month and a half ago, since he lives in Virginia and I live in Maryland, I hadn't seen the ads promoting this conference. And he sends me a text with the Arlington Catholic Herald's promotional poster of this, and it had Dr. George Harn at the top as keynote speaker. I think it was C.C. Pecknell, and it was John DeJak, and it was my name. And at the very bottom of the list, it was author of 3 books, Tim Carney. It's a funny moment. I had a good laugh. I come to speak to you, as an educator, kind of looking back on his own experience, of course, as we all do. And I have a few thoughts I've stitched together. I'm going to be quoting from 3 books. One of them actually is a Joseph Pieper book. But the first one is a good book that I'm gonna borrow 5 points from. And then I'll make 2 points of my own. I basically want to talk about friendship and feasting. And you might think that that's curious because school is all about academics, but I think there's something that gets to the heart of contemplation and feast days that is vital for vibrant Catholic schooling. So, Catholic schools have a rich heritage and are indispensable instruments in carrying out the Church's mission. And as we all know, ensuring their genuine Catholic identity is a great concern for the Church today. In 2006, the Secretary for the Congregation on Catholic Education, Archbishop Miller, authored a very clear and concise book. I brought it if you want to see it. I can show you later. But it's a very brief book, and like most Catholic Vatican documents, it's got lots of footnotes, but it is a very brief read. And in it, he outlines the 5 essential marks of Catholic schooling. And so I'll start with those, and there's a deep resonance here. And I'll use some of those as springboards to talk about friendship and feasting. So Archbishop Miller from Vancouver says, inspired by a supernatural vision. That's really kind of the starting point of Catholic education. Catholic education seeks to inculcate the process that in the student they remain in light of his own transcendent destiny. So similar to Dr. Harn's eschatological kind of horizon, or Matt's kind of double vision idea. This idea that we need to keep reminding the child of his or her own whole-eyed fixed view, not just here and now, but on heaven, so on the beyond. The second one, Catholic education is founded on a Christian anthropology. So it teaches that, grace builds on nature, and as educators, we need to have a sound education of the first, of nature first, as a springboard to then talk about how that is understood, both the natural world and then the supernatural world. And then the last three, Catholic schools are animated by communion and community. The fourth, they're imbued with a Catholic worldview throughout their curriculum. 5, and lastly, they're sustained by gospel witness. Okay, so I know that all of this sits very well with all of you. My perspective, coming to the other side of the desk, as it were, I'm a product of Catholic education, for which I'm very happy and very fortunate to have gone to Catholic schools, parochial, and then all-boys high school. And so in my looking back with a critical eye, it's not just the passage of time, but there is a little bit of a tweak here or there that I've found, is helpful, because these are things that I now enjoy as I teach at the Heights and also at my time at Western Academy, with regard to friendship and feasting, which also, the kids pick up on. So with those caveats aside, I want to focus first on friendship, because I think it's through each individual teacher's response to the gift of his or her vocation that they then turn back over to the school and give back to the school's mission, or the church's mission, that they are already themselves happy and so open to friendship and camaraderie and comradeship, brotherhood. We have kind of like the ideal scenario for teaching at a Catholic school. It kind of goes like this. Well, my name is blank and I get to teach blank. So why not do that with a whole bunch of great other folks who are passionate about what they do and their subject matter, and develop deep friendships at school. And with my time, especially at Western, I was very happy to kind of put together, call it faculty development, professional development, but it was also kind of like part book club. And it was every Thursday morning. The breakfast burritos were like the main event at the beginning, right? You can all imagine. And then we talked about business of the school that week and the upcoming week. But then we delved into something that we were all reading together, whether it was a poem, a handful of poems, or a book that we were marching through. We had deep and real contemplation as a group, because it was more than just a book club. It was a real kind of weekly discussion, and those were really very, very enriching times. Every day, therefore, is a red letter day for Catholics, right? I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit from that last one, which was, like this gospel witness. But of course, there's a gospel, typically at every Catholic school that's read aloud. However, when I was going to school, I'd have to, get up an extra half hour early to go to Mass. So, it was a fairly typical Catholic school. It was a good school. But I was a typical high school boy. And so I just said, am I going to get up early? Most days I didn't go. So what I'd like to continue to offer to you is that if schools are animated by communion and a community, they kind of have to be in that order. And if they're going to be imbued with the Catholic worldview throughout their curriculum, I think that should also include their scheduling. So I'm going to get back to my script here because I did go to the trouble of typing this out, and I'm going to get back into the thread, okay? Part of the friendship is that at Western Academy, this was a few years ago, we also, in addition to doing lots of great discussion, we played together. We played football every Friday, or most every Friday. Sometimes it was faculty, basketball or croquet or other things. Granted, this was an all-male faculty, but those friendships were very deep. Other things that we did were we attended various cultural events. Sometimes we attended plays or lectures. We did readings together that were dramatic. And every summer we went to a Shakespeare play in the hill country of Texas. And so those were great ways in which we were this little band of brothers, and sometimes wives came. And we deepened our friendships. Friendships are one of the great blessings that we have in our lives. So why not share that with our fellow colleagues, no matter how quirky or ornery or meddlesome they can be at times. Yeah, exactly. Another kind of byproduct of the friendship vibe that can be gleaned on campus by the students of the faculty is that can kind of calibrate their own behavior. So just as at home, if you have kids or have raised kids, they're always kind of sensing how mom and dad are getting along or not. So too, I think kids at school know who's friends with whom and how deep that friendship goes, because it does spill over outside of the classrooms into the hallways and so forth. So friendliness among teachers does grease the wheel of learning. Students are then, I think, better disposed for achievement and good behavior. And now to just go to feasting, if I could. Please, let me just go to feasting. Both at the Heights and at Western, they have this really rich tradition of this Catholic worldview. So it's seen not only in the curriculum, as I said, but it's seen in the daily scheduling, and also the yearly calendar scheduling. And it was kind of this, I hinted at it as I was kind of, in a way, bad-mouthing my old Catholic school. And I went to a good school, but at the Heights, what they do is they basically schedule the classes around the Holy Mass. Okay, so Mass is given pride of place. And I know this is maybe preaching to the crowd here, and maybe you guys, of course, you guys know this and get this here. But I think in a lot of Catholic schools, this is maybe an afterthought when it comes to scheduling. You know, I had to get up early to go to Mass if I wanted to when I was a kid. But if it's not an appendage to the schedule, then I think that sends a really deep message to the student body. And again, at the Heights, we offer Mass, but boys can opt in or out. They can either go to enrichment or silent reading period if they do not wish to attend. But on those days in which we do have, holy days or festival days, we really go all out. There's one in the fall and one in the spring. And I think that if you schedule it like that, it's akin to being the King's good servant first, right? The King's good servant, but God's first, pardon me, right? And it is also akin to the primacy of Mary's chosen part over Martha's, right? Where the soul of the apostolate needs to be sustained on prayer and on meditation and on union with God. So in a way, if you get the Mass right, then what happens is everything else kind of falls into place. In his book, Liturgy and Personality, Dietrich von Hildebrand argues that the liturgy of the Catholic Church decisively shapes a healthy personality. Quite simply, if you get that right, then what follows should be, in time and with grace, that the person becomes more Christ-like, and their personalities will develop to reflect the inimitable child of God that they were created to be. He states, "The mysterious truth is that the unique, inimitable design of God is fully and ultimately realized in a man only when he is transformed into Christ." So this basic prioritization is akin to Jesus' teaching, seek ye first. So I think, if Catholic schools could just kind of give the pride of place to the Mass and the schedule, then, I think that would, go a long way. On special feast days, at the Heights, we have, All Saints' Day, and we have the Ascension Solemnity. We have festival days in which, at school, there are no academic classes. So we start those days with Mass first, right? So called the communion first and then community, right? It would be hard for the boys to go to Mass after having eaten a barbecue lunch and done all of these great games and exerted themselves. Because on these festival days, that's exactly what happens. We also have a competition of the bard, or a poetry recitation competition. So all of these things are basically both in mind or in heart and in spirit. The boys are lifting themselves and exerting themselves and giving praise and honor to God. And this gets to the theory of festivity that Joseph Pieper wrote a whole book on, right? It's called In Tune with the World, A Theory of Festivity. And in it, he basically kind of extrapolates how all of this is kind of tied into Sunday and Easter. And he also says that, the arts are actually kind of right hand in glove with this. So it's appropriate for these festivals to be public, just as they're acts that are unusual. They're not of the ordinary workaday world. And he relates in his book that the Sabbath or the Seventh Day ceremonies, Seventh Day commemoration of creation was also a completion. So he came to an end of his work, and he also approved his work, his divine work, and he saw that it was very good. This affirmation and legitimization of things of the world is also an encouragement for us to celebrate festivals with festivity. He also claims that the gift of being created is to be celebrated on Sunday, and that it's the first and foremost of divine gifts, and that Sunday looks back and recalls the beginning of creation, while also heralding a future bliss, just as Christ's incarnation reached its full fruit and revelation in the resurrection. He opens one of his chapters with this quote from kind of a twist on Plato, or a quote from Plato. He says, within the same sentence in which Plato calls the recreation of festivity divinely founded, he also says that the muses were given to us as festival companions. Feasting, then, is a form of worship, rightly understood and carried out. And we are literally eating and drinking with the saints at Mass, if you think about it. When we break from our studies to celebrate as a school, we not only stop our work and are refreshed from it, but more importantly, we ennoble ourselves as creatures in the image of God and give back to Him the praise and worship that is due, an homage that other lesser creatures cannot withhold. In closing, the liturgy is not only the highest form of worship, but it's the greatest festival and the deepest and most profound way of entering into communion and community. Therefore, vibrant Catholic schools don't just simply study the saints, but they feast with them. And those Catholic schools who feast together and do feasting correctly and with reverence, they identify with Christ in the most real and true sense of that understanding. Thank you.
Okay, this stage looks like it has intentional designs, meaning that when I see all these hinges, I tend to think there must be a trap door ready to be sprung, and maybe it is. So I'm kind of amazed that you're all still here and breathing. I know, often can be said that certain personalities will take all the oxygen out of the room. But I think that's happened already. I think we're pretty close to having all the oxygen taken out of this room. So thanks for being here. And just to clarify, when Pat Miggins was talking about having ornery friends that were quirky, and I forget the other adjective, I happen to know he and Tommy Lagarde are good friends. So I just wanted to clarify who he was talking about. This is my first venture into Chelsea Academy. I've seen the logo; it's a beautiful logo. I've never made it to the campus, and I was thinking over some things to say, that make sure I didn't say the same thing Pat said. Though I think he did; he covered everything, so I'm not going to speak very long. No, but it was kind of a poetic entrance, and I was wondering who named all these roads. It was before you get to Chelsea Academy in this place that all these beautiful things happen. First, you must go down the dismal Hollow Road. And I was wondering how long that road and how deep it was going to go. Fortunately, the next road was some kind of happy trail. And I knew I was on the right path and making progress because I was getting to the shores. And then the last road was progress. We're ready for Pilgrim's Progress here, and so I'm here. And and thinking of some of these beautiful ideas and revisiting Josef Pieper, that beautiful soul, who played such a big role in my life as an educator. There are many summers of reading Pieper through the summer, and there were a few that Pat and I were together. I barely know him. And sometimes as we were making a road trip, we had Pieper open and we were reading Josef Pieper. It was quite beautiful. And we can think of some of these poetic moments, but also I have to chuckle. And seeing John's experience, and it's clear to me, by the way, that both these men are profound gifts to their school. And it's important to see these beautiful things, and to talk about Shakespeare and Plato, and then get down to Charlie Brown. But I also have to chuckle because leading a school and serving as an administrator has a succinct job title, and it's called pain in the arse. Right? There is no way around it. It's a wild endeavor. And one of those administrative jobs that was mentioned, there was, so I taught at the Heights for many years, also as an administrator. And then I went and founded a school in Houston, Western Academy. And then I came back after some time to work at transforming a school into a liberal arts school that had been in existence for some time. And it's amazing all the things that you have to deal with. And this is not just to say as administrator we're going to start our pity party, though I think we could, over scotch and bourbon. That's the best way. And then we may touch on some people. But getting into the grit of trying to run a school and then taking time over the summer, which everyone knows is nothing but vacation, right? But summer is also a time really to reflect. It's a time to get back and get the ship repaired, but it's a time to reflect on what's important. What are we doing here? And the kind of schools that we're after are not typical, and they're more difficult in several senses. They're also profoundly joyful. And I think you can sense that even on the stage there's a sense of joy. But thinking as we started coming back, I kind of look. This word culture has been mentioned many times, and thinking about founding a school at Western and transforming a school in the most docile, humble zip code in the United States, in McLean, Virginia. You have to think, all right, well, how do we form this culture? And there's a lot of concrete things that go into forming culture, and there's a lot of invisible things that go into forming culture. And when we think about, and it's important for us to see the big picture, to see the transcendent. We can't have perspective without it, and the role of contemplation is profound. But there are a lot of tactics and strategies that have to be employed if we're going to really make these schools thrive in the way that they can, and also in a way that they should in today's culture. So we have to think of that in context and kind of imagining these things. There's a song that comes to mind of an artist that I love profoundly, like also Wendell Berry. If you haven't experienced Wendell Berry, he's a profound poet, and his Sabbath poems really will help you do the things that have been mentioned here today quite beautifully. But Andrew Bird is a great artist. I don't always agree with his politics, but one of his early solo albums is called Weather Systems. And he talks about seeing the weather systems of the world. And he is speaking metaphorically, not about geoengineering. But there's something to say, all right, thinking about those things, those invisible things that form a culture, and especially those things that are vital to a culture that we're talking about. How do we form a culture of friendship? How do we and what are the practical things that have to be done if we're going to do that? We can talk about feeling friendly, just like we can talk about contemplation. But how do we actually put things into form where some of those things can be cultivated? Because they can only be cultivated. They can't be forced. What are some of the other things to say, like this, in the culture we're in, we're not just looking to preserve culture. We need Renaissance souls. And has been alluded to, laws are great. But without story, without music being rooted, the laws are going to be meaningless. Music and story are the way that culture is shaped. And it's the fastest way to build culture. It takes time, but it is absolutely the fastest way to change and destroy culture. And many good schools, I think we have been guilty, and I think we continue to be guilty of neglecting those things that form culture. And the imagination and other things are some of those things. So as I'm reflecting on these things, that's one of the core images, and that's the word that I'm reflecting on. I say, what's the role of image? What's the image of the school that we want people to have? Right? And when we think of image, not just concretely, right, though the concrete matters. It was interesting to come up here and say, wow, Chelsea Academy built this school in an air hangar. That's pretty amazing. And we could do beautiful liberal arts in this beautiful setting of the mountains, and we have an air hangar. And I was kind of wondering, well, what's it going to be like inside? And I was pleased to see some of the effort of wood paneling, but especially to see the windows that were opening to the valley. Right? But these concrete things matter. But as we think of image, we're also thinking, again, what are the invisible imprints that form a school? And what are the stories? And so when we think of images too, I think of stories. And what do great stories do of letters and literature? They also, there's many things that are taught. And I think to reflect on the way they're taught. But they also show patterns of life. We can talk about a number of these things, and it's important that we speak of them. but how do we attract people to this pattern? Right? How do we help deepen ourselves in finding these patterns of life? And so the kind of school that I've kind of marked out for St. John the Beloved Academy is, and it's a liberal arts school, but I've marked out more firmly to say it's a Christian humanist liberal arts school in the vein of Thomas More and Erasmus. And in that way, we say, well, what are these things that inform a Christian humanist way? And the role of image for the humanists. Before I lose my way here for a second, how do we concretely imagine this way? What's the role of image for these humanists, as opposed to just abstracting on these good things? So we could talk about what virtue is. We can explain what it is, right? But how do images help us understand it? How do images and stories help our reason expand to perceive it, and potentially bring others into this to show that it's attractive? And to me, what I go back to every spring, and often as I can, is I go back to the great Christian humanist William Shakespeare, and just briefly touching on some of the plays. I just recently gathered a few souls, including our pastor, and we had some refreshments, and we gathered up, and usually there's a group of parents that join us, but on this round, when the parents were looking to join us, it was apparent that the wives were not showing up, and so we had to pivot from the Shakespeare play that we're planning to read, Much Ado About Nothing, to something else that could handle an all-male cast. And this was a familiar exercise, as I did plays at the Heights for many years. But we read through The Tempest dramatically, stopped and discussed it, finished it off. Right? And this is not an easy exercise for everyone, but it's to say, well, all right, looking at the bard and the wisdom that's in there, what are these patterns of life that you can see in The Tempest? And it's the same and you'll see their core patterns through all Shakespeare, as you'll see in Much Ado About Nothing, as you'll see in Macbeth, as you'll see in Hamlet, right? And a number of things come out to me just to highlight them, and also at a later time I can make an argument why I think he's the epitome of a Christian humanist as an artist. But some of these patterns to life of Prospero in The Tempest, a good man who was wronged, who loved learning, went up to his ivory tower, was not worried about the material things of the world, and gave away ruling Milan to his brother. Right? And he's a good man. And he brought his daughter, and his wife had told him that his daughter was his, that he believed her. And they were isolated and sent to this island. And he had these men that his brother usurped his power, sent him off. And then he has his enemies in his power. And there's a journey that Prospero has to make as a good man. Not as an evil man getting transformed, but there's a journey Prospero must make. And he gets to a point, right? And on the island, we know, he frees the spirit, Ariel. And then there's that earthy character, Caliban, right? Who wanted to get his daughter and impregnate her and have many Calibans all over the island, right? An earthy, somewhat despicable character. And then we have Ariel, who has been trapped. And then we have this character Prospero, who's easy to judge again as a good man. But is there something wrong with him? Is there something off? Right? Is his journey to being cramped? And how must he free himself? As we think of liberal arts education, is a real liberal arts education if there's not a sense of liberty? There's not a joy in that liberation, right, with our kids? And part of his pattern is he does learn things about himself. He's got Ariel trapped. Ariel wants to be free. Right? And eventually he does free Ariel. One of the hinge moments is when he has all his enemies gathered, right, at his mercy. Ariel talks about having mercy for them. Right? And then this story unfolds as these patterns of forgiveness, these patterns of a death that he must go through to have new life, these patterns where he gets pulled outside himself to become himself. Ariel, in many ways, when he's letting the Spirit pull and free the Spirit, he is freeing himself. But it's not just to abstraction. He's not going back to his ivory tower. He's going back to serve as a leader in Milan. And as he's healed, he has to gather back Caliban, the earth, right? To be grounded, to have his imagination rooted. But there's these patterns of life. Now, in the middle there, he is weaving a love story. He has his daughter, Miranda, fall in love with Ferdinand, or at least he created the conditions for that. And there's an eros that is struck almost instantly between them. There's a profound desire. Their eyes are open. They are struck to see into the essence of the other, to see how beautiful they are. And Prosperos feels, this magic is working. But he feels he's got a much better thing to produce. And that's a play he's worked out for them. And he tells himself, they've been waiting for my play all, I have to do it. Right? So he has his Ariel work out a play, and it's very classical. Right? And the language is really kind of quite sentimental. It's beautiful. And the play that he produces, and in the story, in this play, it's going to be perfect, right? And the thing that's going to mess it up is Cupid is kicked out. We're not going to bother with Eros and that dirty business of Cupid, right? And also Caliban is absent. In the play, as you read it and as you experience it, the thing that would strike you is it is dead. It is boring. It is miserable. It is not a work of art. Right? And he thinks that's his greatest. But when he's actually pulled outside himself, and the work of art that he's weaving with these characters, right? That the forgiveness, he's bringing them back to conscience. It's another big theme of Shakespeare, is these conspirators, right? What they're willing to do themselves, and then come back to this moment of this healing. When he is beside himself, pulled out of himself, he is paradoxically most himself and most effective. And we could see this pattern, and in many ways when we think of the liberal arts and so forth, for their own sake or not, it's for being sake. It's for being sake. And that question comes up time and again. Prospero is healing the others, but he's healing himself as a creature of God. And when that is done, the effects are profound. And it's not his own doing. But we'll see this pattern. It's amazing to see this pattern through Shakespeare. Even Hamlet, who gets a bad name, right? Because that, don't imitate Hamlet. Well, I would say imitate Hamlet. The pattern he goes through is a pattern of life. Maybe a prolonged agony to see him struggling with his past. Right? But there's another pattern of going through death to life. And then after he's made his mistakes, killed Polonius, right? Struggled with this, honoring his father and vengeance or not, and to do or not, right? That question of to be or not to be, and he's rejected Ophelia. The story is when he comes back and he leaps in Ophelia's grave, right? And that image of him coming out of the grave, right? And he says explicitly, "Before I was not myself," right? He is this pattern of being. And this, the power of literature and the power of great artists like Shakespeare, and this is one of the things that we carry on is say, well, how do we attract people to that? Now, one of our temptations to say Shakespeare is amazing and there's few that can match him. Shakespeare is also hard to bring to an attractive way to young students without really bringing them in and conditioning them, right? And one of our questions also has to be, when we think of culture, we think of friendship, we think of how do we get kids to love these good things? But our culture needs makers as well. We need good lawyers. We need people willing to enter into politics. We need a whole symphony. But our school system, one of the things we have to ask is, are we forming makers? Are we also forming contemplatives who can be in the world? And makers who can't contemplate are not makers. It's the root of making art. It's the goal of art. It's also the source. But how do we do that in a school day? And the tactics and the strategy to say, all right, what does this mean? Do we just introduce them to observing great art, which is nice? Do we just talk about history of art? Do they make art? The act of making art, the act of getting outside to observe nature, right, and struggling to imitate it, that process requires a deeper listening. But that process of making art, getting out in nature, having a conversation about great literature where you're allowing the students to explore. It's not just, let me tell you these great ideas, right? And we can feel really good as a teacher that I nailed it. I was dramatic. I told stories. I'm lecturing now, right? And these kids got it. And when we start asking questions, see what we can find. We got that much. Do we disappear to allow them to engage? Now, all those are nice. But then when you start looking at the structure of the school day, 6-7 hours a day, we say, all right, well, how do we make that happen? Because a 40-minute class period does not really lend itself to going out and getting still in nature. It doesn't really lend to making art. It doesn't really lend to conversation. How do we think about the structure of a school day? How do we think about the structure of a school year? I was mentioning this effort to bring in leisure days for the community to gather. Right? There's a lot of thinking of tactics and strategy to say, well, how do we form these Christian humanist schools, these Catholic humanist schools, all the early Christian humanists were. Right? So because we have a culture, we need our students to ask questions. They need to know how to persuade. They have to love history and find ways to engage others so that they can share these interests and have friendships on them. It's not just combatants. That effort, that one-dimensional effort, is self-defeating. It's a slow death. We don't revive the arts, and also if we don't revive philosophy. We won't revive those things without contemplation and so forth. And getting back to image and stories, there is an image that I often come back to, and I'll just finish this with kind of going through a little journey. Not quite a pilgrim's progress as I made here, but of sorts. And so let's put some images and flesh on this, and let's say maybe we're a school leader, and it's the summer, and we're going out on a long solo hike. And it's difficult, but there's a lot of things on our mind. This issue could be some home issues, right? This teacher just told us they're leaving. We've got no time to replace them. Can have all these things in our head that also we're forgetting the gifts, but these things can be in our head and thinking through all these things. We're going on a hike, and it's still with us, and after a while we come to a vista, and a vista can be beautiful. We may catch a glimpse, and it may be right at sunrise, and we can see the sun dipping below the mountains, or maybe the blue hour in the Shenandoah Valley is just about to hit. And that image, the beautiful image as we stop, may bring some consolation and may also give us a glimpse of what's beyond the image, the goodness of things. Right? This contemplative moment may be there. And we'll continue hiking, and then let's add a little magic in here. And let's say we hear beautiful music kind of in between the gusts of the wind and the rushes of leaves. And we catch glimpses of the music, and we lose it, especially as our problems in our head build up. Right? But we catch it again, and we go towards this beautiful music that somehow resonates with us. And we see a tree, small tree, sturdy. It's a surprising tree at a distance. As the light's hitting at the end of the day, the tree looks like it's on fire. Has a mysterious resonance, has a song. And I want to stop and think, all right, this fire, how does this transforming fire, this beautiful fire, what does that speak to with education and the kind of schools we need? Well, we need schools where it's not just technicians, as we said. You can hear some of the voices that have been on this stage. But this is a school that requires teachers to be light, but also to be lit, and to be burned, so to speak. As Viktor Frankl says, he who would give light must burn. And we need leaders to have that fire if they're going to give light and show a beacon, but also be willing to be transformed themselves into these things. And we think that fire, we're trying to light a fire in these kids for them to remember who they are, to get a taste. What does that take? What vision does it take from us? What tools? But let's say as we're beholding that fire that's mysterious and it's not destroying that tree, right? We also see in there a tree, a heart, a beating heart. The heart gives light and eminence. In the structure of the tree, we can see that the arms reach out, almost like it's pulsing things to the corners of the earth, drawing them back in. And we can think, what about the heart? Do we tend to the heart in our schools? What do we think of the heart? Do we just play it safe? Do we form friendship? Do we let them form friendships with these books? Is there eros? They have images of eros in their stories. Do we light a fire where their desire for knowledge is opening up? They're longing for communion. Thinking about the heart. And we also know the structure of it. It's easy to run it where the heart can get concealed, or can get hidden, and run through the forms. Right? And then lastly, the last image here is we're beholding this tree, and maybe the way the leaves are hitting, right, and shimmering, it may be act as a mirror. And we may see an image of the face of Christ in this tree, right, and have a sense too, where we find truth, we find Christ. But also to know, like, the faith, we're going to have faith. We're going to pass faith on. Is it a personal relationship? Do we see Jesus? And maybe in that mirror, we also may see ourselves in glimpses. Is he at play with us? Are we an image of Christ? An imperfect image, but nonetheless resonating that profound image that is in each one. So with that, I'll let you go, and thank you.
All right, good afternoon. As the last speaker here, I will try to be pretty quick. I was amazed, all these faces looking back this direction. The only person sound asleep was Matthew Meehan. And I'm kidding, he wasn't asleep at all, but he should be 8 kids. I would understand that for sure. So what I want to do, just quickly tell you about a friend. friend I think some of you know already about his school. And then two trends, two kind of stories within American education over the past century. And then I think some questions that presents for us as mostly Catholics here in this room. So my dear buddy, Keith Nix, you know the name Keith Nix, the head of the Veritas School in Richmond. And the Veritas School in Richmond has become kind of the flagship classical Christian, non-Catholic school. I think maybe in the U.S. Maybe it's that and a couple others, Regents of Austin, people would name. People are constantly flying into Richmond to tour the Veritas School of Richmond, see what they're doing there. And it's an incredible, incredible school. Keith is a visionary. He's a master fundraiser. They bought and took over this old seminary in downtown Richmond. It's an incredible place. And Keith has a number of families. Are we on here okay? Keith has a number of families that are there that are Catholic families. And one of the things he says he loves, and we'll joke around about this a bit, is that he beats the local Catholic schools on Catholic identity. This is not a Catholic school, right? And he thinks it's hilarious. He laughs about this. He says that the Catholic identity at some of the Catholic schools around us is so bad that we're beating the Catholic schools at being Catholic as a Protestant school. Well, what is he talking about exactly, right? Well, he would say, look, we read St. Augustine, we read St. Thomas, we read Dante, and you don't, right? We cultivate the heart to live a life of worship in so many ways. And you keep talking about this with Keith, and he gets fired up about it, and he'll say, look, I want to shame the Catholic schools back into being actually Catholic and passionate about the things they ought to be passionate about, right? I'm in a Bible study. We call it Beer and Baron. It's about 20 guys. We have a beer. We listen to Bishop Barron. We pray together. We talk about life. Until about 5 years ago, not one of us sent our kids to a Catholic school. Zero. Now we've had some schools move in, Chesterton, Divine Mercy Academy, where I send my own kids, and we're starting to. But the reason we never did before is because they just weren't that different. They were pretty much like the public school, maybe a statue of Mary, maybe Mass once a month. But in terms of the curriculum, the assessment, almost everything else, it was parroting the public school system. So I want you to think about Keith and his words as I tell kind of briefly these two big stories within American education. Catholic schools peak in America in 1965. In 1965, 50% of Catholic children in this country went to Catholic schools. And since 1965, unfortunately, it has been a story of decline, right? We finally kind of hit rock bottom possibly in 2020. Up until that time, we had been closing about 100 Catholic schools per year for decades, right? And there's a lot of reasons we could debate the cause of this. The loss of religious life post-Vatican II, about a third of the sisters serving in these schools as there were then. But it's been a story of decline, down to 1.6 million students. At the same period of time that we doubled the number of Catholics living in America, we went down by 75% in the number of students being served by Catholic schools, right? Now, during this same time, or a little bit after this, starting really in probably the early 1980s, we have the beginning of what a lot of people would call the classical school movement. 40 years ago in 1984, there were about 4 classical schools in the country. The first census data we have for homeschoolers, early 1970s, with this weird mix of conservative Christians and like total hippies who both wanted to be homeschooling. And there's about 13,000, right? Today there's over 5 million homeschoolers in America. That's explosive growth, right? We went from about 4 classical schools in the early 1980s to about 1,200 classical schools today. So the question I want to present to you is, how do we, as mostly Catholics in this room, understand the classical education movement, right? Is this our movement? How does it relate to us? And what I want to propose to you is that the work that you're doing here at Chelsea Academy, the work at St. John the Beloved, the work at the Heights, at these faithfully Catholic schools, that really you are the fullness, the fulfillment, I think, of everybody's hopes and aspirations in the classical school movement, right? The truth, the goodness, the beauty, the fullness in Christ, in the Eucharist, we're only seeing in our Catholic schools. And there are so many of these schools like St. Jerome, schools like Our Lady of Lourdes in Denver, our Sacred Heart Academy in Grand Rapids, schools that were a hair's breadth from closing, and they embraced a classical model. They embraced the fullness of the teaching of the church. They went back to daily mass, and now record enrollment, fundraising records as well. I think what America needs, what our education system needs, is Catholic schools that are uncompromisingly Catholic, that are refusing to compromise. And I think when we do that more and more, folks who are looking at great options within the classical school movement are going to be looking to Catholic schools more and more, because I believe that that's what this entire movement is ultimately pointing to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you to all of our panelists. We are running a little behind, so I actually want to throw it open to you all in the audience for a couple questions right away here. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand. We will do our best to get the mic in here as soon as we can. But otherwise, please just shout it out there. So if you have a question for our panel here, Leading Vibrant Catholic Schools, raise your hand. We have our mic we can come around with as well. Yep, one right here.
Hi, Joe Cosby. One thing that keeps coming into my mind as I'm listening to all of this is a lot of the kinds of observations and thoughts that Jordan Peterson has had. I won't try to go through them all, but let me focus on one, which is that frequently when he's asked, did Exodus really happen? He will say yes, and it still is. Meaning that we're not only learning a story about our faith or our history, we're learning a lot about ourselves because we are participants in some real fashion in everything that we're learning about. You know, going back to the idea of these patterns that replicate and that are part of life. Could any of you comment on that sort of idea about how these things actually pull us into the real world and not just teach us a story that may be interesting and fun to learn about?
Take the check.
Sure, I think, and one of the thinking of images and the stories is how do these ideas, how do you recognize them in story, but how do we bring them to life? Just thinking on life, and I think every one of us has to say, well, we could talk about irony, for example, and the patterns of irony, and how often these characters that we see in literature do things to prevent this catastrophe or this thing that they most fear, and then their actions to prevent it actually make it happen. Right? And how many times we look to avoid something or prepare ourselves, and as an administrator, I've done this as an administrator, as a husband, a father, friend, do we recognize some of those patterns? We want to control things, keep away, dangerous things, but because we have sheltered our child too much, or we kept out Cupid, so to speak, that something far worse may happen. And that's just an example that I can think of. But I think to relate it to human experience and the art of trying to teach, where we can recognize these patterns in human experience, so it's not just abstraction. I think that's vital. It's not an easy thing to do, and that gets to another point of how do you find the teachers that you're looking for? How do you train them, and how do you pay them? I mean, it's nice to think that we want cheap Catholic schools. It's not nice to think that we can attract the quality of teachers that we want with this kind of school and think that they can exist without a decent salary. So that brings another dimension and strategic problem into thinking of schools that we've had to deal with, which is also fundraising. But teachers who can bring those experiences of life is key.
One way that you can support our excellent teachers is through the Chelsea Fund, which you have on your tables. So, time for just a couple more questions. Yeah, one back there.
Well, one question. We live in such a common that we don't live in a normal world. And one of the virtues I think that we really need to think about inculcating, I'm curious about how you all think about inculcating in your schools, is the virtue of courage. Because just to live a normal life, even if you're not out there in the public world, requires a tremendous amount of courage, whether it's telling your 10-year-old, you can't have a cell phone, or, going out and being a public figure, like, 10 years from now and being a public figure. So how do you all think about doing that, in your schools? Or does it just naturally happen?
Naturally.
I'm happy to answer, but you guys speak up.
Well, one of my favorite definitions of courage is by Monty Brown, and he defines it succinctly as standing fast for the good in the face of danger. So a lot of times at the Heights, if it's all boys, I can kind of easily make the athletic comparison. You take a hit for the team, and so forth. Courage, stepping out of the athletic or bodily realm, like just stand up for one's belief, or to maybe seek office or to go out in the public square in a formal way. That's something that we don't necessarily groom them for, per se, but at the same time, we always want them to know that that's a path that they should consider, because it's beyond themselves. So that's more like, undergrad, grad school, perhaps contemplation. But it does, in the high school, we do like to at least plant those seeds and tell stories of guys who have done it, guys who have gone through the ranks and flourished, because it's through those stories of men and women who have gone through and completed their education and are now giving back that there's that spark, there's that fire, there's that joy that, okay, I can do that. So I think they do need the images of the real live people. Perhaps they're, they've come and gone, no longer on the stage, but they do need, like the Teddy Roosevelts of the world, to these larger than life figures are, I think, very apt for us to put up there and say, listen, he came from this and now look at where he is, and you can do it too.
There is one more question. We have time maybe for just one last one. Yes, right here in the middle.
I just wanted to mention a great blessing that came to me as the mom of a priest is that, thank you, is that my son, Father Steve McGraw, was ordained with Father Richard Carr, who became the parochial vicar at Holy Trinity. And he embarked on this experiment for 10 semesters with high school students. And I was able to work with him with my work in teaching the natural law through classic film. So I just wanted to offer that I would come up every week. It was on a Monday, and the students would see the film on their own, with their parents, and tremendous conversations with the parents and the kids. And then they would discuss the film 1 hour, and then they would come in the next week. Of course, this is a homeschool co-op, but it could be, I just wanted to share it because over the years, films like 12 Angry Men, It's a Wonderful Life, Bad Day at Black Rock, all these tremendous films of the classic era, the kids would really get into it, a certain number. Of course, others, it was just like life was just one darn thing after the next, and they, were that way. And then others would not be up to it, and they would make these really foolish jokes about things. But the heart of the kids, they took to it. And so I just wanted to offer that as one way for the tools of the natural law, because they do come out in films. So just an idea.
I think that to piggyback on Tommy's question as well, is the role of stories is profound.
to teach courage and film, but the books that are chosen really matter. And getting these kids to read good books outside of school, there's so much that we have to try to do in this complementary relationship with parents. But like the summer reading that we want to encourage, or just giving them resources of here are great books. Many parents didn't come from liberal arts background, but there's so many stories that are really rich, and understand that courage is fascinating. Can you have prudence without courage? Can you is fear a good thing? Fear is a good thing. So let's interest them into what it is. But when fear overwhelms, right, then it destroys. But without fear, we can't protect life, right? If we're not afraid of a grizzly bear entering this room, there'll be, we're in danger. But so the kids through stories, but I think there's other things for us to think about. What's the rhythm of the day, and then how do we complement with parents? And one of the other themes is technology. How do we limit technology and get parents to be reflective on technology so the kids can have real experiences? If they will, there will be plenty of opportunities for courage. There's going to be a misunderstanding with friends. They're going to be out with neighbors playing games, right? But if they're zoned out and just, they may be behaving well. It was one of the most disappointing things to hear during the COVID times. We handled it quite differently, and very grateful for the lesson system that give us that leeway. And also I have to say that my experience has been profoundly good, as they really allowed us to be a niche liberal arts school. But hearing so many leaders say, like, gosh, the masks are really nice because these kids are really well behaved. We don't have all the problems have just disappeared. And that was disconcerting. And I think so some of us say, how do we allow these experiences? Do we allow free play at recess? Do we allow enough recess time? So many kids have such scheduled lives that just be able to go and play pickup or play tackle football, or, are they climbing trees when they're home? Are they going out in nature? There's going to be plenty of moments for courage. Plenty of moments of, do they hunt with dad? My kids don't, because they don't hunt. I wish I did once in a while, but there's other things, right? So, but I do want to emphasize what you've been saying, I think, with films, and then having parents be more reflective. If we attract them into it and we give good resources that don't come off as, this is really safe and righteous. Now, how about this is beautiful, fascinating, and It's a Wonderful Life is profoundly deep, and that's that partnership. How do we get and then good, thinking about these cultures at school, like how do we attract these faculty? But families really, and the kids form other families so profoundly that attracting good families to a school and helping them build friendships is so vital for that. But I think so much of it is being smart to say, limit technology, limit the screens.
I certainly agree. That's a good point to end it on. Please join me in thanking our panel. So just a few notes here at the end of an excellent day. I really do think that was a great note to end it on, talking about the families that you need to make a school run. Because I, again, want to really reiterate my thanks to all of those who made today possible, especially the Chelsea Parents Association. We have such a great group of families here at Chelsea Academy. So my thanks go out to them, to Alex Clausen, to Megan McCarthy, to Candace Lee Van Skyke, to Jim Bursma. Every one of our parents is really responsible for the wonderful event that we had today. And I also want to encourage you all to stay involved with what we're doing here at Chelsea Academy, whether that's telling your relatives about what we're building here, about the school that we have, or even getting involved in supporting our mission here to form the next generation. And please do check out the book table. We have excellent books for purchase. All the proceeds go towards Chelsea Academy. So thank you all for joining us today. Good night.